Hello and welcome to Career Atoms. If you've received the fantastic news that you'll be offered a role that you're keen on, this video will help you effectively negotiate and maximise your salary. And you'll be able to do it professionally without damaging positive perceptions and coming across as a money-focused mercenary. I'll outline a number of important principles relating to offer negotiation that I've learnt over the years, and I'll pull these together to help form a 5-step pay negotiation strategy that could make a significant and very profitable difference at this critical end stage of the job hunting process. One thing I've learnt is that whilst most companies have an ideal salary or range in mind that they wish to pay prior to conducting a recruitment search, this isn't always wholly realistic or necessarily guided by current market data. Often their target is simply based on the leaving salary of the person the role may be replacing, and if that person has been in situ for a number of years, there is a risk that incremental annual salary increases may not have kept pace with their peers in the external market. This means that you shouldn't just assume that what's outlined at the beginning of a selection process is what will always end up being offered at the end. In my experience, there's been so many times where the final agreed offer is actually above what was initially envisaged, sometimes quite significantly. So if it appears that there's a smallish gap between both parties' expectations at the outset, it may be prudent not to automatically rule out the opportunity before you've had a chance to explore things further. On the flip side to this, it's risky to completely ignore any stated remuneration level and assume that even though your expectations may be 50% higher than what the company hopes to pay, they'll just significantly adjust their expectations if they really like you. It's not impossible, but more often than not, such a large disparity simply ends up leaving both sides frustrated and unable to close the gap anywhere near enough. And in a much more competitive job market, you don't want to price yourself far beyond other strong candidates. The more successful negotiators generally do their research and have clarity on salary market data across their industry and from comparable employers. Because they have a more acute awareness of their market value, they can better leverage this in offer negotiation. One of the key mistakes that most candidates make is showing their cards too early on in the recruitment process by openly highlighting their specific salary expectations at the very outset. This is especially so when they play it very safe and purposely pitch at the lower to middle portion of a proposed salary range for fear of pricing themselves out. When you state a pretty lowball figure up front, you provide an employer a perfect opportunity to meet your expectations and accordingly offer you exactly this amount, even if they feel you may be worth more. Unsurprisingly, when a candidate has told me what they want at the very outset, it's usually exactly what they'll end up being offered at the end. And then it's much harder to try and negotiate anything higher without potentially leaving a bit of a sour taste. You clearly said X when we asked the question, and so we took your word on good faith and have accordingly offered you this, but now you're telling us you've changed your mind and it isn't enough, etc. In my experience, I know full well that many candidates who've immediately accepted a proposed offer could have successfully negotiated a higher salary, sometimes simply by asking the question. Oftentimes an employer would set an initial salary for me to offer, but also notify me up front of a maximum level they'd be prepared to go to if necessary. Many individuals missed out because they didn't so much as test if there was any further negotiation or not. If you don't ask, you don't get. Some candidates are hesitant to negotiate or even just ask the question, perhaps because they've never done it before, or they feel it gives a sense of being ungrateful. Maybe there's a general nervousness as to how it might be perceived, or a fear that you somehow blow it and thus risk the offer being withdrawn. What I can say, however, is that I've never come across a situation where an offer has actually been withdrawn simply because someone in a very polite and professional manner asked the question as to whether there was any further room for manoeuvring. If an employer actually ever did take such a drastic hardline approach, then I'd congratulate the candidate for potentially dodging a huge bullet. This clearly wouldn't be an employer that works hard to hire great people, encourages open discussion, listens, or really values staff. It doesn't hurt to negotiate, especially if you follow the professional approach that I'm going to outline. You have nothing to lose because the very worst that can happen is that they turn around and say no. But you can even look on that in a positive manner because at least you know precisely where you stand. If you do accept the role, there will be less wondering in the future as to whether you could have actually secured additional pay. In some professions and situations, it could actually reflect quite negatively if you don't come back and negotiate. I recall lots of sales managers and directors expressed disappointment whenever salespeople accepted an initial offer without any attempt to negotiate. The response is often, I hope they're going to be a little bit more persuasive when it comes to influencing customers and negotiating deals. Now, pulling everything together, here's my optimum 5-step strategy to negotiating and maximising your offer. You'll most likely be asked about your current and expected pay details at the beginning of a recruitment process, but you really don't have to state a figure. Instead, mention that whilst remuneration is an important element, you'd need to weigh up the overall package, including benefits, as well as other broader factors to determine if it was indeed the right opportunity. In which case, until you've gone through the entire process, met the key individuals and asked all your questions, and done some thorough due diligence and weighed everything up, it's simply impossible to give an exact salary figure at the outset. But, and this is very important to say, do reassure that if this does indeed turn out to be the right opportunity, you're certain you'll be able to come to an amicable and sensible agreement on salary. When you're asked about salary, remain calm, professional and resolute, and you won't risk anything. I've never witnessed an employer reject someone at interview stage purely because they weren't able to pin down an exact salary expectation figure. If an employer or recruiter is really pushing hard on this, just tell them your current remuneration and leave it at that. Similarly, if you're applying for a job through a company's online applicant tracking system and it forces you to provide a specific salary expectation figure, just put your current salary. The key here is to avoid committing yourself to a required figure early on, especially before either party even knows if it's the right match. From your perspective, if you do provide a figure, it's then going to be much more difficult to go above this later. And from an employer's perspective, it's only after that they fully understand the value that you can bring that they can actually apply an accurate price. They may determine that you could potentially make a more significant contribution than they'd initially imagined, or that you're the standout candidate, or that they've been recruiting for a while and the cost of not having someone in the role is really starting to hurt, etc. These and other issues can all mean that a salary that was initially considered appropriate turns out not to be. Rather than just plucking a figure out of the air, you're in a stronger negotiating position if you can be more precise because you've actually researched pay levels in comparable companies and industries. Simply put, you're more likely to be listened to and taken seriously if you can demonstrate an acute and accurate awareness of the wider market and your worth within this. Even if they can't pay exactly what you propose, you're more likely to receive a higher offer because there's less chance of being fobbed off with a lowball offer that might sometimes be thrown out because the candidate was less aware. In addition to sanity checking ballpark remuneration info with people who are already part of your network, do some general Google searches and more focused ones on job boards and specialist sites such as Glassdoor, Wage Indicator and others. You'll also find that some of the larger national recruitment agencies publish annual salary survey data for a number of key job roles across different geographical regions. All of this information will help you build a valuable picture, and you do need to be able to back up your position with actual data and show that you haven't just plucked a figure out of nowhere. Briefly outline what you've found and where you found it. After an employer has decided that you're the one, it's often beneficial for you if the employer feels a degree of pressure in needing to pitch first with a sensible offer. Psychologically, they won't want to disappoint, so I believe you lessen the chances of them coming back to you with an initial lowball minimum level offer, and the stronger the initial offer, the better, because when it comes to any further negotiation, a small increase on a higher initial offer may be easier to secure than a bigger increase on a lower initial offer. Once an employer has chosen you as their preferred candidate, you're in a stronger negotiating position, so whatever figures they come back with, express appreciation for their interest in you, state your keenness on the position and organisation, but always ask for more. Ideally, this conversation is conducted face-to-face or on the phone rather than via email. Whilst I'd personally opt to communicate directly with the employer on this sort of matter, I also appreciate that many candidates might prefer that a recruitment agency, if involved, acts as the intermediary on their behalf. Either way, the worst that can happen is that they come back and say no. But in my experience, about 70 to 80% of the time, an increase was granted. Admittedly, not always at the optimum level that a candidate was ideally hoping for, but an increase all the same. How you approach this conversation with the employer will depend on how you feel about everything and whether you have other viable options or not. If the offer is some way below the minimum level you'd consider accepting anyway, you can be much more direct. Just come right out and say that you don't feel the offer adequately aligns with your skills, experience and market value. Provide some additional headline market data snippets to back this up. State that having now considered everything, you'd need an absolute minimum of X, otherwise you'll reluctantly have to withdraw from the process. The ball is now firmly in their court as to whether they meet your expectations or pass. On the other hand, if the pitched offer already meets your expectations or is pretty close to them and you're minded to accept it, you'll want to take a more measured approach, which is about maximising the offer but absolutely not rocking the boat. In this case, without blurting out that you're going to accept the offer, you need to dangle the carrot somewhat and leave them feeling that the ball is in their court and that you could potentially be secured if they play their cards right. Tell them your level of interest remains high, you're seriously considering the offer and comparing this with other similarly good options, and ideally this is true rather than just a ploy. Tell them that you're in the process of weighing everything up and hope to come to a decision very soon. Then you can either politely ask if there's any further room for manoeuvring on the offer, or ask if they can meet your expectations of an exact figure. What you need to be aware of at this point is the importance of trying to steer towards a best and final offer situation and a conclusion sooner than later, as opposed to an elongated renegotiation and going backwards and forwards multiple times. If it's potentially more than just base salary that you'll need to consider and negotiate in order to reach a positive conclusion, aim to put all the salient points, issues, questions and requirements on the table in one go. And there's two reasons for doing this. First, if you continually drip feed different issues and drag out the negotiation process over a period of time, the employer will begin to question whether you're as interested as you're portraying, and they may begin to think you're purposely stalling and holding out for another option. In which case they'll be less inclined to fight for you, and in the background they might even quietly begin to line up a possible replacement candidate just in case. As more time passes, you also risk leaving a bit of a sour taste in people's mouths even if you eventually decide to join. And obviously if you delay too long, the employer may just call time and withdraw the offer. The second reason you want to put everything on the table in one go and outline all negotiation points and issues is that it's not uncommon that any adjustment to an offer may require more senior level approval, and as such, the employer's hiring manager may themselves need to escalate this further internally to someone more senior. As such, it's better that this is a one-off, single point in time conversation and they go already armed with all the information, questions and negotiation points, because the very last thing they'll want to do is sheepishly return again and again each time you raise new things, as it then starts to reflect badly on how they've dealt with the situation. Make their life easier and put everything out there in one go. Some things you may get agreement or movement on, some things you might not, but at least you've taken a professional approach and everyone more quickly knows exactly where they stand. If it's apparent there's no negotiation on the base salary, or at least not to the level that you're ideally looking for, but you're still very keen on the role and seriously considering accepting the offer, before you do so, think more broadly about any other possible elements that could also be important to you and which may warrant some negotiation. For example, if there's a bonus, can the potential award amount itself be changed and negotiated? Or can some of it be guaranteed for an initial period of time? What about seeing if there's any manoeuvring on the broader employment benefits? This would admittedly be pretty tough due to companies not wanting to set precedent or moving away from uniformity of the same benefits for all. But part of this approach is somewhat tactical anyway, putting more options on the table and hopefully applying a little bit more pressure, as the employer won't ideally want to keep saying no to every single thing, so it might provide some additional leverage in other areas. Would the employer also look at a formal commitment to support some specific training courses, professional qualifications or certifications, which not only have a monetary value themselves, but which can also significantly bolster your skills and future career prospects? If this is viable, make sure that you get that commitment in writing. However, if you hit a blank on all of the above, but you're still minded to accept the offer anyway, the final three options that I can think of would be 1. Ask about the possibility of an earlier salary review process, perhaps after 3 or 6 months instead of 12. Now clearly there's no guarantee to actually increase the salary even if this is granted, but it does leave the door ajar and allows you to pull out all of the stops to prove your value in the intervening period. Secondly, see if there's any further flexibility around starting and finishing times, working from home or similar things that could save you some commute costs and allow for a greater level of work-life balance. And 3, see if there's any flexibility in the actual role content and level of responsibilities, because perhaps there's something that they can do here which will provide you A, with some very useful and valuable experience right now, which will make the role even more attractive. Secondly, it could also potentially pay additional monetary dividends later on. So think broadly, and you may well discover that the key to successful negotiation and your ensuing acceptance of the offer doesn't just lie with the base salary alone. This now concludes the offer negotiation video. I hope you'll be able to utilise some of the things that we've covered to your benefit. And even if negotiating is well outside of your comfort zone, please remember just one key takeaway point, that at the very least it doesn't hurt to ask the question on potential salary adjustment before you accept. You've really got nothing to lose, but you may well find that it is worth simply asking the question. Thank you very much for watching.